Mr. Mayor, we are now live.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Sorry, I should have been ready for this. There we go. Due to the COVID-19 emergency declaration, this special meeting of Ajax Council is being held electronically and live streamed on the town's website. All members of council in attendance are participating by audio and video teleconference, and town staff are available throughout the meeting if council members have any questions on the agenda. For members of the public watching from home, please bear with us if we encounter any technical difficulties throughout the meeting. So now call this meeting to order. Start with the land acknowledgement. I'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is situated within the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas, more specifically the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, signatories of the Gunshot Treaty of 1788 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. This land is and will continue to be home of the Indigenous peoples. Let us acknowledge the mistakes and traumas of the past through authenticity and support truth and reconciliation. Let us engage and celebrate Indigenous communities by being leaders of action and acknowledging the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations towards truth and reconciliation. Let us keep these principles close as we continue towards truth and reconciliation and as we move forward with kindness and respect as a community. Does any member of council have any disclosure of pecuniary interests? Seeing none, moving into the closed session. Let's pull up the resolution. I have moved by Councilor Tyler Moore and second by Councilor Lee. The council convened to a closed session pursuant to section 239, paragraph 2B of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended to discuss personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees. Those in favor of going to closed session?
I hate it here. I mean, why don't you understand?
Mr. Mayor, we are live again.
Thank you. I have moved by Councilor Bauer, second by Councilor Tyler Morin, that all directions approved during the closed session be ratified. Those in favor? Any opposed? No, I see all hands. That is carried. Have the confirming bylaw moved by Councilor Khan, second by Councilor Lee. The bylaw number 06-2022 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council of the corporation of the town of Ajax at a special meeting held on February 7th, 2022 be read a first, second, third time and passed. Those in favor of approval of the confirming bylaw? I see all hands. That is carried. And finally, moved by Councilor Crawford, second by Councilor Dies, that the February 7th, 2022 special meeting of the council of the town of Ajax be adjourned. Those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Carried.
Madam Chair, we're now live.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Due to the COVID-19 emergency and requirements for physical distancing, in-person attendance is not permitted at this meeting of the Community Affairs and Planning Committee. This meeting will be live streamed for viewing at www.ajax.ca/live. Electronic participation is permitted pursuant to Council's procedural bylaw. So for those of you who are joining us this evening, thank you very much for attending. I would like to call the meeting to order with the acknowledgement of traditional treaty lands. We would like to begin the meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is situated within the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas, more specifically, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, signatures of the Gunshot Treaty of 1788 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. This land is and will continue to be home of the Indigenous peoples. Let us acknowledge the mistakes and traumas of the past through authenticity and support truth and reconciliation. Let us engage and celebrate Indigenous communities by being leaders of action in acknowledging the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations towards truth and reconciliation. Let us keep these principles close as Commission's recommendations towards truth, let us keep these principles close as we continue towards truth and reconciliation and as we move forward with kindness and respect as a community. Thank you. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest? None? Okay, thank you. I have a mover for the adoption of the minutes of the regular meeting on December 6, 2021. Moved by Regional Councillor Lee, seconded by Mayor Collier. And that the proposed, moved by Councillor Crawford, my mistake. Moved by Regional Councillor Crawford, seconded by Councillor Tyler Moran. So we have a public meeting this evening.
Sorry, point of order, Chair. We have to vote on the minutes first.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
All in favor? Told you it takes time. So this evening we have a public meeting and a presentation on the private transportation bylaw. And I'm going to call on Mr. Hannon, who is going to do a presentation for us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate your time. We have included a comprehensive report with this, but as it is a public meeting, we will be doing a presentation to highlight the proposed changes that we're coming forward with. Like, see the next slide, please. So historically, over the last 30 years, the town has regulated the taxi cab industry, but we've recognized that since 2005, there's many different transportation modes that has caused us some concern to look at to make sure that we're regulating properly and ensure that they're all licensed and safe for members of the public. And we've been looking at what types of regimes and licensing regimes we should come forward with. And this evening, we're here to talk about our new private transportation bylaw that we think will highlight all of those different transportation needs. Next slide, thank you. So again, we've undertaken a comprehensive review, and the review was aimed to streamline the regulatory licensing framework. We wanted to eliminate outdating and excessive regulations, which is pretty famous in the majority of the traditional taxi cab bylaws. And at the same time, we've always wanted to maintain that and ensure that the public is protected from a safety standpoint and from a consumer protection point as well. So those are always what we've had in the back of our mind when we looked at moving forward with this project. Next slide, thank you. So over the past 5 years, we've been really watching about what's happened with the industry in relation to ride sharing, the traditional Ubers, Lyfts, those type of businesses. We've been watching what's happening with our larger municipalities across Ontario and across Canada to see how they were moving forward with their bylaw regulations, but it wasn't quite enough just to watch what they were doing as far as regulating going, because the majority of their bylaws were taken in appeals to the upper courts. So we were also kind of on the sidelines watching to see what happened with case law that that may have been determined by the courts to ensure that we weren't trying to create something that we knew that the courts wouldn't accept. So it's been a slow and involved process. We've met with all of our neighbors. We belong to several working groups, both within the Greater Toronto area and within the entire region, to try and ensure that we've come up with a bylaw that's pretty similar in each of those municipalities. And much of the research and the approach that we're going to propose tonight is the same that our neighboring municipalities across the region have already come forward with. Next slide, thank you. So again, we really started doing a lot of research back in 2017, 2018. We created a draft bylaw. We met with both the taxi cab industry then and with the ride sharing industries then to talk about new things that we wanted to move forward with. We wanted to, for lack of a better word, start to deregulate the taxi cabs. We wanted to start allowing them to manage their day-to-day affairs and allow them to bring some uniqueness to the services they were providing to the public. So we were coming forward with that plan. We were also meeting with specifically Whitby and Pickering, who were both in the process and in the same place that we were. And that we did create a draft bylaw as part of that discussion. We did meet with the industries at that time. And while the taxi cab industry was very happy with many of the points we had, one of the things we were looking at doing is changing the licensing regime over the amount of taxi licenses we have. Currently, our taxi cab bylaw protects several companies in town and doesn't allow outside competition. So that was a sticking point back in the 2017, 2018 discussions. We were all prepared to move forward with public engagement and evaluation. And unfortunately, as we know, in 2019, with the coming on of the global pandemic, it delayed all that opportunity to move forward. So that's why we're a little bit delayed and why we're sitting here in 2021 looking to pass that bylaw. Whitby's bylaw was passed in 2018 and Pickering's bylaw was just recently passed in 2020. Next slide, thank you. But again, in the spring of 2021, staff recommitted to moving forward with the private transportation bylaw. Again, we generated the newest of the draft bylaws, and its purpose of doing this project was to deregulating certain stuff, establishing a more flexible licensing system, leveling the playing field, allowing a broader range of service options that will still meet the town's residents' needs, helping to ensure that we have a reliable and appropriate sized accessible transportation options. Again, establishing a new system of licensing and to begin regulating the private transportation networks. And I'll elaborate on these in each of the slides moving forward. So again, currently our existing bylaw regulates us and holds us at 65 taxi plates distributed among 5 companies. The proposed bylaw now would limit those limitations, and it would allow new service providers to come into town. They may be able to provide something to energize the system. We know that between COVID and the introduction of ride sharing that it's really hit our taxi industry hard. But we also believe that allowing this new opportunity and bringing in new companies will help to add some life and some new ideas on how people can better reach out with their industries. But one of the issues that we have recognized is that if we're going to allow somebody to come in, we just don't want to ensure that they're not just coming in with the taxi industry, with the regular plates. So what we've mandated in the bylaw that if a company wants to start doing business, if they want to take out up to 4 plates, the first plate must be an accessible plate. And if they're going to license more than 4 taxi cabs, then they're required to have on the 5th plate, it has to be a second accessible cab. We're going to touch on why we feel so passionate about that, but we believe that this is a fair ratio and it would make any new business owners coming to town to make the commitment of ensuring that we have that accessible fleet. Next slide, thank you. Again, this new licensing system also allows our existing companies the ability to add and remove plates as they deem necessary. Currently, regardless of the license, the taxi cab plates that are issued to a company, they're required to have those on a vehicle that is roadworthy and has active insurance on it now. This new system will let them adjust their fleet size accordingly. If they need more or less plates, they can remove them as long as they maintain the accessible plates ratio that we just talked about. And that from this point forward, the proposed bylaw will mandate that any TNC operating within the town is required to be licensed as of now. Next slide, thank you. Again, we believe that leveling the playing field, while it can never be apples to apples, we do believe that we haven't created an option where taxi cab industry can change around their rates. We still maintain that they have to have the maximum tariff rates that they can charge somebody. But in the existing bylaw, they were only allowed to lower their fares 10% for seniors. Now, we're allowing that the taxi cab companies can come in and set up deals and have the freedom to, at their own discretion, offer discounts or whatever they see fit. If they wanted to develop a policy that says anywhere in town for $15 or for $10, that's completely up to them. As long as they never charge more than what the maximum tariff rates are, that way we ensure that the consumers are protected, that they know what the maximum amount of money the town will mandate for their trips. The bylaw does go on to say that any TNCs are required to only charge the amount in which they're agreed upon when they book the service. So when the rider says that they want the ride, they get the price. When they book that, that's the price they're paying. There's no adjustment on that fee. It's one of the advantages that taxi cabs can use because they can be hailed. They can sit in taxi stands where more of the TNCs are called and booked in advance. Next slide, thank you. So again, we're going to ensure that whether you're a taxi cab driver or whether you're a TNC driver, you need to have a valid Class G driver's license. You need to have a driver's abstract with no demerit points, and you need to provide us with a clean criminal reference check. That is going to be the same for whether you're private transportation or whether that you're a TNC. The one thing is, if there is anything on the abstract or the criminal reference check that is not clear, it has to be brought to the town for us to review, for town to review and or approve. If town staff decide that they don't believe that a driver should be licensed through the bylaw, they still have a right to have an automatic appeal straight to a town committee that would hear the appeal on whether or not that driver should be allowed to drive based on the criminal check or based on the driver's abstract. So there is an appeal process built into the bylaw. Currently, we mandate that there's a written test and a medical requirement from a doctor. Again, this is one of the things that staff has viewed as a little bit excessive. It's not common among our neighbors. It's not common among the TNCs, so we believe that this also too will level up the playing field to ensure that the requirements of both drivers are equal. And we still believe that the health, safety, and welfare of the Ajax residents is still being maintained with the provisions we're moving forward with. Next slide, please. So the requirements of the owners, we want to have a valid $2 million liability insurance policy for each of the vehicles in their fleet. They have to provide the town with an annual safety inspection certificate and also provide us with any records of maintenance throughout there at any time that the town requests. So again, that ensures that the vehicles that they're driving are safe, they're appropriately insured, the users are protected, and that the town has a right to go in and investigate any issues with vehicles that we feel may not be up to par based on complaints. Next slide, thank you. So again, the availability of accessible transportation is always a big concern with the town. Historically, the supplying of this falls within the private business of taxi cabs. We believe that accessible taxi cabs tend to be less appealing to the companies because there's a lower service call for them. And we're talking about the wheelchair accessible vehicles. There's a higher cost to retrofit or purchase these vehicles, and there is an increase in operation. So, the taxi industry themselves are not overly keen on accessible transportation. So we hope that this new regulation or regime on licensing will help increase and provide us with more options for the residents to be able to use accessible transportation, with the requirement that, to enter the town, you need to have one. And if you have more than 5 taxis in your fleet, you need to have 2. So we believe that will help lift that limit of accessible vehicles. Next slide, thank you. So we also know that traditionally, our ride sharing companies do not offer an accessible service. So it's a proposal from the town. We met with our neighbors and came up and looked and really was interested in the idea that they came up with of something called an accessible taxi incentive program. And what they were mandating is that they were required to pay a direct fee, an accessible service supplement fee for any trip starting in Ajax. It's very similar to the requirements of developers having to pay in lieu of trees. They pay a fee. So our private transportation companies that are the TNCs would be required to pay to the town a fee that would be used towards helping and offset costs on the taxi cab industry. Next slide, thank you. So we also did an initiative and looked around at the current tariff rates within the town, or sorry, within the region. We're proposing, after looking through a 1 kilometer trip and a 1 minute wait time, we're proposing that the taxi trip tariff rates be increased 20 cents for that ratio of a trip. We're one of the first to come through in recent times with this new rate. But we believe the other municipalities will be catching up to that rate quickly. And the last time we did any increase for our taxi industry was back in 2010. Next slide, thank you. So financial implications based on the new ride sharing or private transportation is, under our taxi cab licensing, we're probably going to be, we know, looking at a lower income coming in, based on the fact that we know that right now the taxi cab industry in itself has been pretty decimated. We're hoping that opening up the market will allow new companies to come in and revitalize those things. Not having the testing requirement, we're proposing to lower the taxi cab driver's license to $50 from $100. Far less administration on that. It usually takes an hour and 15 to an hour and a half to work through the testing requirements with drivers. That won't be a requirement anymore. It's an administrative license once we verify the documents. And we think that annually we'll be bringing in somewhere about $7,500 for 2022 for the new licensing rates. And through the discussions that we've had with our TNCs, we're proposing that there is a licensing fee between 1 and 25 drivers, 25 or 26 to 99, or over 100 drivers. We know that through some of the discussions we've had with the TNCs that we're looking at a lot of the companies having over 100 drivers. We also know that we're putting on a per trip fee of 10 cents for trips within Ajax. And that is, again, when we look at information we've collected through this process directly from the TNCs and with discussions of our neighboring municipalities, we believe that through the TNC licensing, we'll be bringing in around $70,000 per year in additional licensing revenue. Next slide, thank you. So we initiated an IMO project, excuse me, in mid to late 2021. On the IMO page, it included the draft bylaw that we used as a discussion point, a survey, and outline next steps. We hosted a virtual public consultation session on October 19th. We also engaged in 2 industry virtual sessions, one with the taxi cab industry and one with the ride sharing industry. And staff also attended our age-friendly committee and the accessible advisory committee and presented our proposed changes and got some feedback. And that we also provided our draft bylaw to the town's solicitor, and their comments have been incorporated where appropriate. And again, tonight is the required meeting that we're legislated required to under our bylaw. So we did post on the community page of the local paper in December notification of this meeting, and it was also posted in several areas on the town's website. Next slide, thank you. So I would like to thank the members that helped with this program, myself, Sharon Williamson, Ethan Boston, and Sarah Moore. who helped administer this program through the multi-levels that we've had discussions with all the industry. And I would also like to thank Director Cooper for her guidance in this matter. So I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hannan. Are there any members of council that have questions? Councillor Bauer?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Hannan. Very interesting. So the fees, I know the TNC fees listed that that's an annual fee that's charged. What about the taxi cabs? Is that also an annual fee?
Through the chair, that is correct. And there would be annual fees coming in.
So, and the town you would collect them from the TNC, not the individual drivers, right?
That is
How would
correct.
that-
We would be dealing for the TNCs. We'd be dealing directly with the companies.
Okay. And you said that I think it said Pickering and is it Whitby or Oshawa, like our neighbors have the same type of bylaw currently.
Through the chair, that's correct. All of our neighboring municipalities along the waterfront all have a ride sharing bylaw at this time.
And can you talk again about the accessible transportation? I think that's great to mandate that there's a certain number based on the number of cars. So do our existing taxi cab companies meet those targets right now?
At this present time, they don't. They're not mandated as strongly. This new bylaw will ensure that if they have any cabs on the road, they will be required to meet these requirements.
Okay, because I think at one of the more recent accessible advisory committee meetings, there was talk about, I think this bylaw are about the availability of accessible cabs in Ajax, and there really wasn't. There was a shortage, and I think Ms. Moore had said that Whitby would be. We had an agreement with Whitby that they would come in as needed. Is that right?
Through the chair, that's correct. The issue that comes in with the accessibility, there is a provision in the Municipal Act that allows cross municipality pickups and drop-offs based on licensing. So we had given permission that if Pickering accessible cabs, or sorry, if Whitby accessible cabs had the availability to come in where Ajax couldn't provide that service, that bylaw services wouldn't be pursuing that as an illegal pickup.
Okay. And is Whitby charging any fee to the rider for that service? Any additional fee?
So through the chair, no, they would be under the law. They're not allowed to charge any additional fees other than the standard taxi related fees.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any further questions? So, Mr. Clerk, did we have anybody from the public who wished to speak to this?
Madam Chair, we did not have any members of the public registered to speak at tonight's public meeting.
Thank you. So I just wanted to thank Mr. Hannan for his presentation and for really placing a need or recognizing the need to have accessible vehicles out there. It's really important. I hear that all the time, that people struggle to get those. So hopefully we get some more into Ajax. I appreciate that. Thank you. So at this time then, if there's no other questions, I'll ask again. None? Okay, thank you. So there are no other presentations or reports, and I do have a motion here for the proposed private transportation bylaw as presented to council for approval. And that staff be authorized to prepare an amending bylaw to the 2022 fees and charges bylaw to establish fees related to private transportation as outlined in the report, to be forwarded to a future council meeting. So the mover is Regional Councillor Lee, seconded by Mayor Collier. All in favor? Any opposed? It carries. Thank you. And I do have a motion to adjourn this meeting, moved by Councillor Bauer, seconded by Councillor Khan. All in favor? None opposed. Thank you very much.